Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. We're going to be talking about Every Door Direct Mail today, affectionately called EDDM. We've got a few people logging in while we do that, or while we wait for them to jump in. A few helpful items. First of all, we've got everybody in lecture mode today. That means your microphone's muted, but you still can ask questions using the chat feature. You should see chat down there at the bottom of the big dialog box. Just if you have a question, pop it in there, and we do have somebody monitoring the questions throughout the presentation today. The other thing, if you want to get rid of that ugly dialog box so it doesn't encroach on the slides as we go through them, there's a little orange arrow in a vertical bar. You just click on that and it shrinks the box. And when you click it again, it comes back. Once again, thanks for coming today. We will have a recording of today's session available. We'll send it to you in case you want to pass it on to any team members, or want to go back and look at sections again. It will contain video and audio. Okay, so let's get going here. That's me. I'm Kevin. I've been here a real long time. Love print and direct mail, and I think what we're trying to do today is kind of embodies our philosophy here. We want to help people do stuff that works. So today's going to be a bit more about marketing dynamics and less, about dog and pony show on our print capabilities. With me today also is Steven. You notice the last name's the same. He's my son. He works here in business development, works a lot in the franchise space. He's been 7 years. He's got a background in marketing and finance, and has actually worked with several organizations on EDDM campaigns. So he is very familiar with it. Just a rough overview of what we're going to do from an agenda standpoint. First of all, we're going to, talk about just what is EDDM and what are the benefits of doing it. Who does EDDM make sense for, and when. It doesn't make sense for everybody. So we'll kind of try to give you some criteria. We're going to review some case studies. We're going to talk about this issue. Is EDDM a better fit for new stores or mature stores? And, kind of what are some of the differences? What's the business case for EDDM? Is there one? How do you decide if there's a business case for your organization? And that's really, to a great extent, tied to postage costs, but also acquisition costs. We're going to talk about some of the specification technical issues associated with EDDM. Steve's going to spend some time talking about route picking, not just how you do it, but some of the best practices to really, make sure you're getting to the right people. Then some execution methods. How can you actually do EDDM? How can you select routes? There's different alternatives that are available to you. Okay, so let's start out by defining EDDM and the benefits. First of all, EDDM is, as the acronym indicates, it's Every Door Direct Mail. So it's a saturation mailing program offered by the United States Postal Service. No addressing is required on the pieces. You can hit, all residences in a given route, or you can hit businesses and residences. You have the ability to do either. Steve will show you how. From a pricing standpoint, the postage is really cheap. So there's some things you'll have to do to get that cheap postage, though. You're going to have to, and I say you or your service provider, you're going to have to bundle the mail up right. You're going to have to take it to the right place and enter it properly. And so there are some, things you have to do to get the good pricing. Maybe just as importantly, it's not part of a marriage mail package. So instead of being one slip amongst many in an envelope, it's going to stand alone. And that makes it more impactful, even though in that context, the postage costs a little bit more than marriage mail does. And some of our customers are finding that even though it's a little higher cost than like Red Plum or Advo or some of those, it's actually more effective because the pieces get viewed to a greater extent. At present, the pieces have to be flats, and flats is postal nomenclature for bigger than letter size. We'll talk more about that later. There are some rumblings that the Postal Service is going to offer a letter size option for EDDM, but we haven't heard anything definitive on that yet. So let's talk about some of the pros of EDDM. The first one is that no mailing list is required. That's going to save you some time and money. No addressing is required. That's going to save some money. The postage is low cost. We'll show you some comparisons on that later. You can send big pieces. The pieces are going to be bigger than like just a normal size postcard. And maybe most importantly, it can be a very high ROI tactic if you have the right kind of audience or the right kind of prospect base. Okay, let's talk about some of the cons. The first con is it's actually not targeted. So you kind of have to weigh that. Is kind of the carpet bombing approach, will that make sense? Personalization isn't possible because we don't know what piece is going to get delivered to what house. We just basically give the carriers a bundle of mail, and they're just going to leave one at each, one each house on the route. So in that context, you may be wasting some pieces on non-prospects. We'll talk about it may be worth doing. Okay. Because we can't really know which piece went to what house, and we can't put the intelligent mail barcode on the pieces. It's really not possible to track to the household level as far as response goes. The last limitation is the retail option. And I suspect most of you are from the corporate world that are attending today. You're not going to use the retail option anyway. The retail option is an option that's presented to like small local businesses where they can not have to buy a permit, and they can just go down to the post office and do EDDM, and they're capped to 5,000 pieces a day using that retail option. We enter mail at bulk mail entry units at USPS, and we're not subject to that 5,000 piece cap. Steve will have more to talk about with that when he starts showing you some of the route pick and stuff. Okay, so let's spend a little bit of time, talking about who EDDM, does make sense for. Let me back up and get on this one because there's a few things I think I need to emphasize. So EDDM really makes sense for people that are marketing to consumers. If you're a B2C marketer, a retailer or somebody that's marketing to consumers, you could be a good fit. And more on that in a couple of minutes. Some other folks we've seen use EDDM real successfully have been like churches, are basically doing mailings to people in proximity to their either owned or rented facility. Political candidates, they do a lot of it. Schools who are sending out mailings to all their residents, ditto for local governments. And we've also seen quite a bit in the real estate industry by agents who are farming neighborhoods. And, so they can basically hit every house in the neighborhood. So when does it make sense? It's really, we've got this 50% statistic up here. It's really a function of the cost associated with EDDM versus targeted. Generally speaking, you can mail about twice as many pieces using EDDM as you can doing a piece where you've bought a list and you've addressed it and produced it that way. So you understand, like we've got some customers where 70% of the people that live in a given area or prospect, their product is generic enough that 70% of the population can use it, 30% can't. Well, the math says then and that it makes sense to do EDDM, even though 30% of the people, you don't know which 30%, but 30% aren't prospects. It still probably makes sense to look at EDDM, and we'll have a little bit more on that later. Okay. So just some more food for thought on who it makes sense for. It does work for retailers with higher margin sales or customers who have significant potential to be ongoing customers where the annual margin or the lifetime margin will be, significant. The thought is if you can acquire them, if you can get them in the store and get them signed up for a loyalty retention program, then you'll spend a little bit of money to turn them into a customer. And typically when we're counseling people who are using EDDM for new customer acquisition, we'll usually tell them, hey, get them signed up for the retention program or give them some kind of a bounce back coupon that gets them back to the store and kind of starts establishing a pattern of buying. It also makes sense for high sales volume customers that might not repeat. We've got a case study we're going to show you today on a remodeler, and I think once you see the math on that, you'll see that it makes sense there. So it's not just retail only. There's some other fits. There's some people that it's not a fit for. It probably doesn't make sense for pizza places or dry cleaners because their transaction value is too low to justify the acquisition cost. I mean, when you've got a $12 sale, it's probably not going to make sense. And we'll show you some math on that. So where your customers come from matters also. The sorts of stores that typically operate in strip malls and neighborhood centers are pulling, 85% of their customers from within 3 miles are a good fit for EDDM. And that's a lot of retail businesses. Those kind of businesses need to do direct mail to pull people in, as opposed to the folks who are in mega malls or something like that, where the mall pulls the traffic. For retailers who are extremely niche, like we deal with some people where really only 10% of their customer base is really a prospect, or they pull from a broader geographic area, EDDM probably isn't a good fit because it's going to be, kind of too expensive from an acquisition standpoint. Those kind of people, the real niche people or the people with broad geographic bases are probably better off, going the targeted route. Here's another criteria. With prospects, many times when you're getting raw prospect data, you don't necessarily have a lot of purchase behavior history on them, unless you can model it somehow. So the point is that with prospects, quite often there isn't enough info to really drive personalized offers. So EDDM can make sense there. If you do have the ability to drive offer personalization, and offer personalization is going to increase the spend or the margin, then targeted probably makes sense. Okay, we pulled up 3 different case studies. I think you're going to agree once you've seen them, they're all pretty divergent. These are all EDDM case studies. We'll kind of go through them here and let you take a look at them. So the first one is a retail-oriented case study. They were sending out pieces. The postage and everything cost about $0.25 of an each. They were doing pretty large, quantities, like in the 600,000 range. It's been more than less than that. Sometimes it's been 200,000-300,000. It's been as high as 2 million. Total cost on this particular campaign that we're referencing here, and I've kind of rounded the numbers off, but it was in the $150,000 territory. The response rates they got were between 2.4 and 4.8%. We've got a range there. The value of the offer impacted the results. I mean, so, and this is kind of interesting. Most of you are familiar with Bed Bath & Beyond, who like forever sending out $5 off coupons. I think that's a practice that a lot. So that one's been tested, and like, you know, what we've found is that in some cases, a slightly higher dollar off tied to a higher dollar spend actually pulls the higher response rates. So instead of 5, maybe 7 or 10 tied to like a 35 or a, you know, $40 or $50 purchase actually, and this might seem counterintuitive, you know, maybe the bias is towards like, okay, we won't require much of a spend, but sometimes having the bigger dollar off on the coupon creates more impact. So total response is a little over 20,000. Average cart for customers in the $50 range. That kind of varied a little, not a ton. And margin, like in the $13 range, 12, 14, somewhere in there. Okay, so like in this case study, the sales were a little over $1 million. The margin was about $275,000, and the ROI on margin was 183%, which is a pretty strong number. And the new customer acquisition cost was about $40 per customer. We're going to talk a little bit more about acquisition cost. Acquisition cost to me is the key metric when you're doing prospecting mail. How much did it cost you to get the new customer? Okay, so let's look at another case study. This was for a remodeling company. They did 5,000 mailers. The campaign cost them $1,293. So here's what ended up happening. They ended up getting 17 direct calls. Doesn't sound like a ton, right? That's less than 1% response. Some people might look at that and say, it was a failure. You're going to see in a minute, it's not a failure. Estimates, 10. Work obtained, $120,000. So for an investment of about $1,300, now this was a remodeler, so it doesn't take a lot of customers to add up. In their case here, their ROI was about almost 100 to 1, pretty strong. But here's something else that we thought was just as interesting. Before the campaign, their page visits were running in the 12 to 61 per day range, you know, organic search, direct entry, some AdWords, that sort of thing. They were getting 12 to 61 visits per day. In the 5 days after the mail dropped, they had gotten 353 views, or 70 per day. And, you know, the number was actually quite a bit higher. Early in the game, their page visits were up to like 132 a day. So this just kind of points out, you know, one of the compelling things about direct mail, if it's used for lead gen, and really this was a lead gen campaign rather than a direct sales campaign, or it still is new customer acquisition, but it's really, you know, trying to get people into the funnel. The direct mail, the purpose was to get people to the web or to pick up the phone call. And so we just say this: if the objective is lead generation, consider, you know, really strong calls to action at the web to try to get people to raise their hands and actually tell you who they are. Okay, here's the third case study. It was for a bakery of all places that was going through a grand opening. Grand openings, store openings, are a great application for EDDM. You can tell a lot of people about your new store very cost effectively. Okay, so they sent out 4,000 pieces. The offer was a discount coupon. Okay, so opening day showed up, and there were the smiling employees at the bakery, and more importantly, the customers were lined up outside the bakery. Now, I'm not sure this was the smartest thing that ever happened, but the owner decided to be gone that day. I don't know what the specifics were on that, And they had so many people coming in the door that they stopped collecting the coupons and gave everyone the discount. Now, having too many customers is a high-class problem. You know, unfortunately, if you're going to spend a lot of money marketing and, you know, acquiring customers, tracking is like really important to measure the campaign success. You know, was the direct mail what brought them in? Was it radio? And to what extent did each, you know, drive traffic? Web advertising, whatever. So that was a pretty hard lesson learned for these folks. Probably something he should have drummed into the team ahead of time. So the bakery was cleaned out by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I guess that's a good thing, right? Here's another huge benefit. Over 900 people opted into the store's e-news. And okay, if you're a marketer, you know getting email addresses is gold. We do email for people over here. Like when you're doing loyalty retention, hey, you always want to try email first because it's a low-cost, high ROI tactic. So if you can get email addresses, it's a beautiful thing. Okay, so there's some case studies. This is an issue and a question that's been coming up increasingly. You know, how do you handle new stores versus mature stores? Are both of them a fit for EDDM? What's the better fit philosophically, or how can you use it in both environments, you know, effectively? Okay, so let's talk about EDDM for new store openings. Now, remember that 50% number we threw at you before. If your prospects represent more than 50% of the population, you know, you've got a new store and you need customers, EDDM is a great fit. If you have a lot of customers already, you're not a new store, it's a mature store. It probably would be best practice to send tailored offers to your customers and even to your prospects so you don't end up with duplication and overlap. So one of the impediments we see to that is there's just some companies out there that aren't gathering real good data on their customers yet. They're not signing them up for memberships. They're not signing them up for loyalty retention programs, or they don't have POS to support it. So EDDM is a great marketing tactic, you know, to build your customer base. For mature stores, it can make sense for some specific applications. I got a little ahead of myself a minute ago. So if you don't have real good POS data, or you don't have customers in the membership database or in a loyalty retention program, then I would still say EDDM could be a low-cost tactic for you, you know, if you meet that 50% rule. And even if the business isn't extremely mature, if you still don't have a lot of recurring customers and you need more, for instance, the remodeler, they need recurring customers. Or they don't have recurring customers, they need more customers, you know, it might make sense for somebody like that to do it. So there's definitely a business case for more mature stores or businesses. Okay, let's talk a little bit about business case, because I think business case is huge. You know, when people, i.e. store owners, franchisees, are deciding to invest money in marketing, they are looking at it like it's an investment. They should. And, you know, are they better off spending this money doing EDDM or some other form of marketing, or are they better off leaving it in, you know, their 401k or some other, you know, brokerage account or something like that? So here's the questions we, you know, say you should really figure out. You know, what's your average customer worth? And so there's a couple takes on average customer worth. Is this a one-time customer, or is it a repeat customer? If it's a one-time customer, is it a big enough one-time customer where it's worth you the acquisition cost? If they're going to repeat, then you might want to consider the average margin value of that customer, that average customer, or the lifetime value if you know you're going to keep them. For instance, the dental business. The dentists use $89 teeth cleaning offers to get people in the store. They'll give away or highly discount that to get them in the store because they know a household full of people with teeth that are going to rot and need braces are going to add up to thousands and thousands of dollars over the coming years. I guess I should have added dentists to the people that this is a good fit for. Okay, so what's the average customer worth? What's the cost of the campaign? And how many new customers were acquired or do you expect to acquire? You know, that's really a function of response and how many people you actually convert into customers. Okay. And then finally, what's the acquisition cost per customer? And that is pretty easy to figure out. If I divide the campaign cost, this blue figure, by the number of customers that were acquired, then that tells me what my acquisition cost was per customer. That is the key metric. It is the key, and we'll talk more about acquisition cost in a minute. I'll stay shut up on that for now. I can compare the cost of acquiring the customer to the value or the margin associated with that customer, whether it's an annual margin or a lifetime margin or one-time margin, whatever's relevant for my business, and decide whether it's worth it or not. So I had a franchisee tell me one time, they figured their acquisition cost was about $40 and they figured a customer was worth about $150 worth of margin annually. That was just annually. This is a customer that does retain their customers for multiple years, but they figured the customer is worth $150 annually. They said they would gladly spend $40 to buy a $150 annual margin customer, not annual sales, annual margin. I'll just throw this out. If you want help, you know, making a business case for your company or organization, or I know we have some folks who do work for clients here today. If you want help making business case for one of your clients, we're happy to help with that. We have a calculator that we can help walk you through to assess the, you know, the business case for your situation. Okay, acquisition cost. Let's talk about that. Using EDDM versus other tactics. So EDDM cost, brand new market, no customers. We might be looking at 10 to 20. And let me just say this. These are illustrative numbers here because it's really going to vary. That remodeler, his acquisition cost was $600 because he got 2 customers. But the 2 customers were worth $120,000, so it was worth doing. The response rates, you know, his response rate was 0.3%. We've got customers getting 3 to 4% response rates, or 5 even. Every situation's different. In this case here, 10 to 20 was what they were spending EDDM into new markets. Solo direct mail was about 20. And EDDM in a mature market was about 40. Now, I will tell you, there was like some accounting assumptions made on the solo direct mail when they came up with the $20 cost per acquisition. That's what CPA stands for up in that column. You know, the costs associated with prospecting were attributed to the cost per acquisition. So like if they had a $2,000 campaign cost and a 25% of the pieces went to prospects, then 25% of the cost was associated with prospecting. And that was what they divided the number of new customers into to get the acquisition cost. Whereas in this next illustration, they mailed the piece out and there was a combination, you know, they just basically hit everybody in the route. It was a mature market. They knew there were some customers there. They got like 11 new customers in that campaign, but they ascribed all the costs for the whole campaign, not just 25%. So they actually showed a higher acquisition cost for the customers. You know, there's different ways you can play with the math. You have to decide, you know, what works best for your company or your client. Shared mail, i.e. Red Plum or Valpak, you know, our client came back and told us they thought their acquisition cost on this was in the $100 to $120 dollars per client range. So why was it so much higher than EDDM? It's because a lot of the people were responding were customers, and the response rates were much lower because the coupon was buried in the middle of a bunch of other people's offers. The way these guys, these marriage people, and don't get me wrong, there's a place for everything, but basically they talk about reach and they talk about outbound cost per thousand. But I would say cost per acquisition is the metric you really need to look at, new customer acquisition. It's based on how much you get, not on how much you bought. Digital display, TV and radio, and paid search all had much higher numbers. Email was actually north of 100 also. I don't know why we didn't include email on this one. Low outbound cost, high per acquisition cost because the response rates are, really extremely low, like 0.1% in some case. Okay, here's a little bit of math behind the 50% rule. So I've got 3 illustrations, quantities. I've got an addressed mail at 2,500, an addressed mail 5,000, EDDM at 5,000. We show what the list cost is for each scenario. 250 for the address, 500 for the address, 5,000, nothing for EDDM. Some costs for versioning the creative and getting some variables in there. Cost of data and addressing as far as mail data prep for 2,500 and 5,000. That doesn't apply to EDDM. Looking on the printing line, the cost for printing. Bundling, there's some bundling cost on EDDM that was embodied in the addressing cost, mail data prep above. And then you've got postage and expediting. If you look on the addressed mail, the 2,500 addressed mail, this is a general, there's postage rates are really all over the board. But in the illustration, it was like $675 for the 2,500 addressed. It was $1,350 for the addressed mail. EDDM was $880. So when you add it all up, you look at the total cost, you look 5,000 EDDM costs right about the same as 2,500 addressed, postcards. And that's where we kind of get the 50% rule from. You can mail about twice as much for the same price. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what the other impacts of lower EDDM postage costs is. You can mail bigger pieces. It's great because you can mail jumbo postcards that are like 6.5 by 11, 8.5 by 11, or even larger for less than what it would cost to mail a 6 by 9 postcard or a number 10 envelope. So you get some extra real estate to tell the story. We also want to contrast postage another way. We did below kind of showed you, or below a couple slides back, we kind of showed you what the postage for 2,500 addressed would be versus, 5,000 EDDM. So here's the EDDM retail rates. They're 17.8. That's if you're a small business, if you take them in yourself. If you do it the way we do it, it's 15.7 plus roughly another couple cents to expedite them to the local delivery post office that services the particular carrier route. Nonprofit, look at those rates. They're extremely cheap, like 7.4 cents. This is one of the reasons why churches are using this stuff. And hospitals and local school districts and people like that. It's really cheap. Versus commercial letters using USPS marketing mail. If your mail goes out all over the place, it's 28.7. If we kind of compare it to the local mail area mail rates, the 5-digit rates like 25.1 and the nonprofits 13.6. So if you can get into carrier route high density, I don't want to get into too much gory detail, but a lot of people are going to qualify for this 25.1 or somewhere between there and that. The postage is significantly more for addressed letter pieces than it is for the EDDM. Okay. Size and spec issues. To qualify for EDDM today, one of the dimensions has to be bigger than 6 1/8 or 11 1/2. It has to be what the Postal Service calls a flat. The max size is 12 by 15. That's why some of those politicians really put big postcards out there. So you can send oversized postcards, self-mailers, or even like catalogs up to 3/4 of an inch thick. We would caution that the rates get a little bit higher as if the piece goes over 3.3 ounces, then there's some piece and pound rates that apply. Okay, I'm going to shut up here now, and Steve's going to take the microphone, and he's going to talk a little bit about route picking practices.
Hi, everybody. Sorry for the nasally voice. It's June in Michigan, so my allergies are on red alert today. Sorry if I sound like a Zyrtec commercial. We're going to go ahead and hop into the route picking. I kind of was peering through some of the attendees today, so we'll try to tailor our message here to some of the folks that are in attendance. I saw we've got several folks that are in the franchise and retail spaces. We've got a few folks that are in hospitals and several other local small businesses. So we'll try to kind of hit all of those on a high level. But really, the long and short of it is there's several different ways to attack this. And if you want any help on this, please feel free to reach out. We're happy to extend some of our resources to you. Myself and several other staff members have done this literally hundreds of times. So if you have any questions, just give us a yell. One thing to consider, and my dad may have touched on this earlier, but one thing with EDDM you have to remember is that you're sending to an entire route at a time, not an individual household. So it's important that when you're picking an individual route, that most of the route looks like what you're wanting to hit. And that sounds really easy, but sometimes it's not so easy. It's so easy to actually execute on. So this part of the process, in addition to your creative and your offer, is extremely important, and one that I think some folks should probably give a little more time to than they typically do. Up here, so we went ahead and clicked a link out to the USPS Every Door Direct Mail Route Picker tool. This is a free tool. Anybody can access this. You see in this type bar here, we have an opportunity to enter a full address, a zip code, or multiple zip codes. So if you're in like the show and event space and you're going into like a convention hall or some kind of exhibiting forum, you would probably have multiple zip codes you'd want to pull from, not necessarily the local area, right? The local area around convention centers is typically not where your customers are coming from. They're typically coming from pockets of neighborhoods outside that area. If you're in the retail space or the hospital space, your customer base is most likely coming from within 80 to 85, 80 to 85% of those folks are coming less than 3 miles from that location. So you would want to hit an exact address when you type this in here. The other option you have is if you're wanting to just, before you actually pick your routes, just gain an additional understanding of what your market actually looks like. This is a great tool to do that as well. So we're going to go ahead and just pop in Beverly Hills zip code here, just so we can kind of get things moving and you can see what we're dealing with here. We're just popping in a 5-digit zip code, and then their individual routes pop up. You do have a couple different views you can use here. The first and default that pops up here is what we call the map view. You can scroll in, you can scroll out, you can do all kinds of fun stuff. You can hover over individual routes to see things. We're going to talk about some more details on that in just a moment. But you also have a table view. So everything that I'm going to talk about here in the map view is also viewable via a table. And that's really important, right? Especially if you're looking to mail to several thousand people, you might want to look at several data points at the same time. One thing that's really nice about Every Door Direct Mail is that it does give you some data feedback on what that route actually looks like from a demographic standpoint. You see right up here, if I click on one of these routes just to demonstrate, we've got a route code, which is basically a 5-digit zip code followed by a 4-digit alphanumeric route code. It's going to report out for me how many residential addresses are on that or in that route, and how many business addresses are in that route. In this case, 0. So it's all households in that one. And then what age bracket, which this is editable as well. We'll talk about more of that in a second. how many people live in the house on average, and then what's that average income look like. All three of these are extremely important based on what business or industry you're in. That obviously changes what your key target demographic or demographics would look like. One of my personal customers has an older, or we'll say more seasoned customer base than what others would. So for them, we would dial these numbers up, right? Instead of 25 to 45, we might want to go 45 to 65, or even 55 to 75. Let's put that in just for fun here and see what these numbers come back. So it's editing that on the fly and changing that. So only 24% of these households actually meet my age criteria that I just selected there. And then let's say, like, I do a lot of work with like local churches and other event coordinators that host these big, like, mom to mom sale type events. I want households that have a lot of people in the house, because if there's a lot of people in the house, chances are there's presence of children. And that's what I'm looking for in an event. So for that particular client, I would recommend looking for routes that have extremely high number of people in the household. And let's see if we can demonstrate that here. Here's another one, 2.72. If we jump over to the table here, we can see there's a 2.89 in there. There's a 2.81. There's a 3.08. These are great routes for somebody that's looking to target families. And then finally, over here in the income, which is obviously, as a marketer, if you're not paying attention to what your income level of your client looks like, you're probably doing it wrong. Everybody cares about income, because the more money folks have, typically the more discretionary income they have. So over here in this table as well, you can see that, right? We've got some folks that are up in the 175 high earning territory. And then right next door, we got this 38,000 or this 70,000 there that's a little more modest. So all things to consider, not necessarily good or bad information. It's just information, right? It's how we process that and how we make an educated decision on what we're trying to accomplish with this piece of marketing. So demographic selects we hit. The table selection, what's nice about this, the USPS site is geared to try to help retail customers. And Kevin touched on that a few minutes ago. Retail customers are as if you were going to go to the window and drop it off yourself. If you work with someone like Printcom, typically the mail processing company like Printcom that would do that is going to handle that process for you. Unfortunately, their site is set up to limit you to 5,000 records, because that is the retail limit. When you go with somebody that processes mail on a daily basis and has tier 1 status, 5,000 is tip of the iceberg. We send multiple mailings a day that have over 50,000 pieces in them. So kind of ignore that 5,000 piece limit if you're going with a company like Printcom or another that has that status with the Postal Service. So as I select, what's nice is that it will go ahead and total these up for me. So let's say I want to pick all these ones with these really high incomes, right? That's really important to me. So I'm going to select all these as I go down, and you can see this number of total delivery addresses going up, right? 2.99, 3.8. Let's see if we can really dial it up here. This zip code's not going to be big enough to tax it. I was hoping I had a zip code big enough to get us over 5,000, but this unfortunately doesn't have. There we go. We just broke it. So it's going to give me this error code. Please ignore that error code. That's not a problem. If you were to ever do business with someone like us, all we really need is this 5-digit zip code and 4-digit route code. Don't ignore the 5,000 limit. So that's the kind of the crash course on how to pick routes. If you want more information on that or have questions on that, please drop those in that question box. We're happy to answer those. If you have more detailed questions or just want to chat with somebody, we're happy to do that as well. I do kind of want to spend another couple seconds on geospotting maps, which is a very useful tool to tell you and give you some insight onto how you should be picking routes. This is kind of a snapshot of a geospotting map that we ran for one of our customers. And each one of these colors represents a different data set of their customers, right? And I don't have the legend in front of me, but I would assume some of these are like a high earner segment. Some of these are more like general. And then some of these are infrequent purchasers or lapsed customers. And you can see with this little blue dot right here, this is where the store is located. And this is where all of these customers are coming from, right? So if we go back to that route picker tool that we were on just a moment ago, we can actually go in on the neighborhood level and see, okay, this is a great route for us. We've got 35 customers on that route. There's another 900 available. Let's hit that route, right? This is a great spot for us. Folks are willing to drive X number of distance to get to my store already. I know that. Let me just hit this hard. The flip side of that coin is maybe out here in this area a little bit further to the east of the store, this doesn't look so densely populated, right? So if you were thinking about doing just a straight 3-mile radius band, that might not be such a great idea. You might actually want to stay more west or south based on what your map actually looks like. So just something to consider. Don't want to beat up on this too much, but like I said before, if you have any questions or want to talk specifics with any of us, we're happy to help. Just let us know and drop us a line. I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic back over to Kevin. He's going to go ahead and wrap us up here.
So let's talk a little bit about execution methods. It's really a function of, your business's need. If you're just a local business, a small business, you can use the route picking tool at USPS.com and pick your own routes. You can actually execute print through a company called Click to Mail. We're actually a service provider for them. They've got a very cost-effective way if you're doing lower volumes of EDDM to upload your art, and just all the work will be taken care of. The next approach would be to call someone like us if you get into higher volume levels, because honestly, with what we're able to do within the Postal Service's system from an entry standpoint, most of the time we can do all the bundling and the entry, and it ends up costing no more if you do all the work yourself, because we get better postage rates than you do walking in off the street. So I guess that's the next option. And then for people who have lots of franchises or companies that are doing work for franchise systems, we offer a couple high volume solutions. We do offer web to print portals specifically for direct mail and EDDM, where we have integrated with the Postal Service's application programming interface and that route picking tool that Stephen just demonstrated. We actually have built a derivative of that right into the site. So a franchisee, a store owner can pick the art version, it, select the routes, and they're all done in one transaction. The other thing we get into for some clients is large batch runs. We actually have a patent pending software that will automatically pick the routes that are in proximity to a store based on geography. We basically have longitude and latitude coordinates. We associate with each store. We measure the distance to every route in the United States of America. We pick the ones that are closest to the store in ascending order, and select the ones based on the count the client wants to run. So, route picking can take, 20, 30 minutes per store. Using our software, we can pick all the routes for stores with 400 or 500 locations automatically. And then, it might take a few hours to run all the paperwork, but that's an automated process. So it's extremely cost effective. Okay. So just kind of, your next step would be to, just kind of assess your own current EDDM efforts. In our follow-up email, which we'll send after here, we're going to be sending a link to our EDDM assessment tool. I know some of you are doing work for clients. This might be something you want to pass on to your clients or take a look at. But this is just going to kind of help you answer some questions to help you figure out, is it a fit? Is it being done as well as it could be? Or is there, improvement strategies that can be developed? We can either send you a link to an online version of that, or we can send it to you in a PDF format. If you respond to that email or reach out to Stephen or I, we'd be happy to send one of those over to you.